making a cup of tea, and although I've appreciated the recent subs and the interest, the questions that come in, I would like to be able to honor those questions, but at the same time, they throw me off. I'd like to build up enough of congruent, mano a mano sort of you see me, I see you, and we're following the same basic direction to where we can open up a line of communication and say, we're focusing in on this with laser precision and trying to unearth something together. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be doing a live stream. Like, to be quite honest with you, I'm not getting paid anything for it. In fact, being on Esoteric Principles of Light.blogspot.com and reporting the truth has only cost me. It has cost me from working. It has cost me from being a professional. And that's the whole point here, is that, more to the point, what is the point? Like, how important is it that you keep some sort of continuity? In other words, quite point blankly, you are protecting something in yourself when you sell out to mediocrity. And we all do it, okay? Nobody's standing on a high horse here. Like, what you are going to lose if you're trying to go through transcendence, what you stand to lose is yourself, is the idea of this bodysuit. The idea that you are somehow universally you, and that you're always going to be you. And in a huge sense, it's you against the machine, right? And that's what every story wishes to depict, right? That it's you're the Messiah. Is it that far off? See, I started to write this story years ago, and it was about a character called Stellar Mass 13. And it really is like us. It's about, the stellar mass aspect is to say you have this plasma, you have this anomalous event, the birth of a star, but then you also have the elements that come from it. And really, strangely, there's 12 to 14 elements, really, if you want to get into it. Gold being one of them. And that we're comprised of these, but it's also giving us an imprint. And it goes beyond just DNA, in my opinion, of a certain persona, right? You can get into Carl Jung's work. And what a bizarre person he was. Like, to see who he was in interviews, like, it's really neat that we have the ability to go in and see these men throughout antiquity, and to say, wow, photographs were available at that time, because it seems like half the time their words are so prevalent and resounding, at least to our souls and to the psyche, from Freud to Darwin, going to Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Herman Melville, and on and on and on. There's so many. But it's like these people are working on the same basic concept. And that is, it's a concept of the self, the retention of the self, and a denial that something is going to be lost, right? A harsh denial of this. Like, it's always this sort of apologetic, this Tertullian, the father of Western theology, as they say, saying that the soul is Christian. And then you're going to have a lot of people arguing with that, thinking that, and this is the whole point, the stance that Nietzsche took was, and, everything that he wrote, from the Antichrist, gay science to Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I mean, it all says it right there, right in the titleship. And then if you go through and read those books, you'll see right in there that it is talking about this. It's kind of like, no, Christianity is much bigger than that, but it is very real. And we are all Christians being hung on the cross. I mean, he was looking at these assertions that Tertullian concepts come into play and relate all the way to John Dee and his hieroglyphic monad, and seeing his monad as a person, like an owl person. You have the crescent here, you have the spherical shape, with the dot that could be looked at as the pineal or the breath. I mean, it's somewhere in there, right? And then you see the linear line that goes down to these 2 feet that could be looked at as half spheres as well, right? And that's what gives us a right and left countenance and balance. And then this bar that comes across, that from geometrical standard, that is the perpendicular, right? And then if you really count the quadrants and the zones, you will invariably come up with all these different number systems. It's about perspective. It's very interesting as well. But to look at vortex mathematics and to look at these different number systems and sciences that go into this primer field energy, that is an actual patented technology with these primer bowls, that's quite amazing. But that wasn't the only one instituting or utilizing these techniques, right? They've been talked about. I mean, Tesla was talking about the 369, the shuffling around of these energetics. And so we look closer at our bodies and we start to think, and this is what these men there's a congruence that happens here. And this is where all these writings, the thing that inspires us from such a deep intrinsic scale, a level of, it's like, what's resonating with that? And it is the soul. And then you have to further identify the soul and to say, how is my soul different from myself? And how is myself part and parcel to this experience of the physicality, the body? The body's really like, how could I be trapped inside something, a mass of flesh and bone, experiencing localized? And it's like, you start to see that it's an operation. It is that it takes a great amount of work, that there is undoubtedly a cymatic, like once in one century, in one area of postulation and study, you see the philosophers and the scientists and the mathematicians come up with these calculations, leaving this postulation that there must be a cymatic influence, only to find centuries later that, yes, you have proven there is a cymatic influence. That is, there is a frequency that's meeting that vibratory force from your very DNA, right? And that it's held to only give out a certain resonance or pulse, right? And that those telomeres are communicating something that is shooting that information right back. You could get stuck into this dualism. You could get stuck into this chiral mimicking aspect, but you are always being watched. You are always being monitored, and the things that you do and the things that you say, that you are being chastised by a moral conjecture of a prevailing and pervading force that's tied into the moon and its position and why it's up there in the first place, that is tied into this whole alien disclosure bullshit that really, if you want to just continue to call them demons so that you're not delineating away from the general essence of the study, that these things are not only around and prevalent, they're there all the time. And then you get into Saturn and Jupiter and the fact that hydrogen can become a solid, you know, there's helium, there's nitrogen, there's sulfur, there's phosphorus. There, other than oxygen, it's like we're only exposed to and carbon. Let's not forget carbon, but it's like when you look at the fact that there's less than 20% oxygen, and it's like how much, if the breath and the oxygen and our experience is only like kind of like on this sliding scale of 15 to 20% in any given environment, and that can be changed, you know. So even our environment isn't dominated by that which keeps us alive. In fact, if you look at water in its pure form or oxygen, if it was 100% oxygen, no, life wouldn't be happening the way we know it. There's like this balance, but is this life? Like, more to the point, is this life? Or are these just bioorganic machines that can't exist anywhere else? And when we use these terms like temporal, what is temporal, right? That through science, through technology, a whole different machine could be fabricated, right, by using such construct assumable solids that aren't solid at all, um, as to swap out carbon with silicon, right? And scientists have gone through this and thought, yeah, that's quite possible. But then you would be changing the entire environment itself. So the very high likelihood that we have another dimension around us right now, that it is coexisting, but not in such a coexistent way to where there is no um, there is no order, there is no ambience that we are sharing in a co-creation sort of way. There is, in fact, what Nathaniel Gillis gets into. So you had on the Sean Ryan show, you had Brian, was it Ryan, or I think it's Brian Fugel, the current owner of Skinwalker Ranch, be interviewed recently, and I put some clips of that up. And he was, I show that, and I'm trying to put this video up, but it's like I'm ripping off other people's material in trying to compile this data set of just trying to say, look at these things side by side. So I'll talk about it instead. And it's like, you know, I even put Hellraiser in there because it's like it's undeniable from our perspective. These things that Nathaniel Gillis gets into talking about, and I'm working around to the whole Skinwalker thing and the fact that that's what Skinwalker means. Like they are they're supposedly souls that sold themselves for a temporal, everlasting sort of life, Cain, right? And to get into the fact, or you could say, um, mother, um, like Jordan Maxwell gets into this, and I don't really think he's going on the right trail, but he says Kirk, Captain Kirk is related to um, um, Circe, this first witch, supposedly, and that witch Circe could be very much related to Lilith, right? And the fact that she was mating with all these demons at the Red Sea, and it's kind of like, from one perspective of one theological rabbi-based fundamentalist perspective, you could say, well, isn't it clear? Like, you see the the buttons being pushed so easily of this human female that you could say is God's creation, but uh, this this God that created her left out one really strong fundamental principle that was left out with dolphins and a lot of other beings on this planet that have clitorises, where it's like don't or skin glands. It's like that tie into this matrix of the human physiological system. So, am I putting females on a chopping block just because of their physiology? No. But what I am saying is that males, this happens to males too, where there's a grooming process and a molestation that occurs, and people, this is a taboo. Like, this is what Foucault was writing about and underlying in all of his work. This is what Nietzsche was writing about. This is what theologians have written about, and that is, how do you say that demons are homosexually molesting young boys? Like, if that couldn't be more taboo, and then you see the evidence of it, like Alex Jones talking about gay frogs, and everybody, that was like the center point to this guy's nuts. And it's like later on you find out it's being fucked with. It's done on the cymatic influences. It's done nutritionally. That kind of leads us into Dr. John Campbell right now, and what he's coming out with in a very loose interpretive way, where we say there is this disease X that is being reported in the mainstream media, and it's like, watch out, there's a new disease coming. You're like, how the hell do they know about this disease? And then you look for it, right? You're looking for it, and like John Campbell, he saw 100,000 extra deaths in the UK since 2014 for last year, and it's like, how in the hell does that happen? So he's looking further at it, and he's interviewing all these people who run morgues, doctors who are doing, um, doing research on these anomalies, these things that in the last interview that are described as like almost like squid, that are the exact shape of these arteries, and they're pulling these things out. Some of them are several inches long, and it's like they'll fill up an entire dish of these things and going, what is this that's blocking these arteries, right? And it's described like it almost looks like it's plastic or something, like, but it's like this fibrous white. I don't know if biopsies are being done on it, but he's gotten to the point where he's been doing this for several weeks, if not months now, where he's looking at this proof going, okay, why isn't this being looked at? And even more to the point where this evidence is being brought forward and they're saying no big deal. Right? How can you say no big deal? So there's implications of a cover up. And when you take these people that come out with this information, and then they begin to make a living off of reporting it, and it feeds back into their ego, right? How easy it is to love bomb, how the narcissist, especially particularly the female narcissist, can love bomb and give compliments to someone who otherwise has no self-esteem, and how easily bought they are. And then suddenly when they realize it, they're like, I never got my point across. I never demonstrated my point and articulated it. And yet, just by scratching the surface, here I am being bought off. I'm being bought off by having my ego brushed against. I'm being sought after for something. Suddenly it's not like a skill set or whatnot. And it's like I'm not even practicing it to my full ability. And there's something that doesn't want you to. There's something there. There's a pervading force that doesn't want you to perfect. That gets back into John Dee. It gets back into this hieroglyphic monad. It gets into Angkor Wat, because when you look at the shape, the structural integrity and the shape of that amazing feat, right? You see the mystic monad in all its glory, right? You see that almond shape again appear as it has over and over again, you know, and you see how that is the form that is being attacked, not only in the tree of life. When you look at those six spheres, when you look at that Fibonacci sequence, when you look at the golden mean, when you look at that standard of perfection, and how Michelangelo was aware of this, obviously Fibonacci was aware of this, but many other people. And so when I was personal training, I pieced this together, you know, like what creates this aesthetic. You start looking this up, and then you realize through my diet, my nutrition, I have come close to this standard, like what they call the Venus Adonis, right? It really is the Adonis. Because when you get into the feminine form and the perfection of the feminine form, there is only the male form. In other words, you get a female who performs at this athletic prowess, who is overcoming, mass equals force times acceleration, right? You get into this area where, or force equals mass times acceleration. You get into the moment arms, the vectors, right? The relationship of overcoming a force and speed, right? And power. And you look at a macro, mesocycle, microcycles of the human athlete at the highest level of achievement, like Olympic athletes, and they're pushing the upper shelf. And there is even the blocking of information there, because when you go back and say use the bench press, and you looked at the fact they try to say that this was psychology, not until the 1980s was it really concurrent and rampant, mainstream. Now you can go into almost any gym and see somebody bench pressing 500 pounds. It's not a big deal, and anywhere where they're taking it serious, um, there's somebody benching 500 pounds. Well, that was like the milestone where it's like, we don't even go there. So how much into the psyche or the psychological aspect was that? Is it like the 100 monkey syndrome? Or is it more like seals and signs that are talked about in the Bible, where it's like once you're breaking through one parameter, all these energies of a connectivity are following along with it. You just can't see it. So one person is doing this in relation to the physicality, the carnal, the corporeal aspect of the temporal, of going about doing this specific exercise, but they're using the exercise science down to its discriminant factors, right? To where it has to be done with this person's physiology. They have to understand how to go through the zone, the amortization phase, and to be able to do these repetitions over and over again, year after year, to where they can do it with such uniformity and precision. But also, you're working with gravity, right? You're working with there's a reverberation, and you're communicating to the broader field about you. And you start to see around this time when records are broken, and they're done concurrently from person to person, pocketed region to pocketed region. You also have these other areas of attribution occurring in medical science, right? In the areas of psychology, in spirituality. You start to see how these various wings are interacting and reacting in a way where it's like you have this concept of this singular soul, this Coptic Gnostic, um, and you begin to see, you have proof that it's beyond conceptual measure, that it's not just an idea any longer, that the construct of John Dee's hieroglyphic monad is not just merely an inference of a construct of a madman's calculations, but that he's looking at how, when you look at the movement patterns, the angular velocity, the escape velocity, the thing that limits us and is allowable, when you're looking at Aristotle's postulations going on to Plato, Socrates, right? When you're looking at these achievements of mind, um, meta-analysis, metacognition, metaphysics, um, and these calculations, and when they're put into play, what this equals. I mean, that equaled Alexander the Great. That equaled total overthrow. That equaled Ubermensch. That equaled um, the refuting of Dostoevsky's Underground Man, because it would be very easy for somebody who has all these checks and balances and all these various wings of principal attribution to fall into a mediocrity, and that there is a demon at the gate, quite literally, you know, from a physics standpoint. I mean, they even reference demons. So when you get into the fact of and what's going on with CERN, what's going on with the Hadron Collider, the boson experiments, the quarks, the quark behavior, electrons in the fifth force being, now they say they can freeze them. And the real postulations of you do have different attributes of time, right? There are instances where they can reverse time. They can trap light in glass and play with time, but they're only playing with time localized. So then you get into these ideas like Lee Smolin, you get into AB time, thick time, you know, and again, you're brought back to a general construct. You're brought back to something where those thermodynamics and those thermodynamic constants, um, and a standard model, the string theory, can be respected, but there's something else going on. There is another parallel program that can be existent on another dimensional scale, and it can happen right in front of you, right here. And then you start to look at temperature. You look at the gases. You look at the predominant, like I said, you look at the elements and the gases around us. You look at the interactions with amino acids and how we are only like I am only a me in the physical form because of the genetics, the DNA that the building blocks represent, right? You get into Watson and Crick's work, Lives of a Cell, DNA, the Human Genome Project. You start to see how this chromosome material in its expression expresses only a genetic inference of um, my DNA and genetic past, right? But that has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with who I am. And so you get back into this existential crisis of who I am. It's only an existential crisis when you're trying to live in this world and pay taxes. But then you see the kakistocracy, you see the feudalism, you see how this information is not only being blocked, but it is being marketed upon, right? That they are actually creating a dividend system out of this. And I point this out down to the alphabet and the numerology, right? And the fact that these shapes, these number systems are being manipulated, and it gets back into John Dee's work. It gets back into the hieroglyphic monad, because it states, look, don't you see the implications of each and every one of those areas of the 26 letters of the alphabet, right? And that there are probably secret letters that are used, just like there are 33 degree, Masons, and there's supposedly many more degrees in different parts of the world. And when you get into the artwork, the Masonic artwork, that can't be separated or delineated from the Rosicrucian artwork, that it's all portraying the same thing. It's like this great work, and you are the great work. And if you can break free, if the Christ within you can break free, so you start to see this as a localized event, right? And even more so, everyone is being put through it, and they're being put through it. This goes back to Randall Carlson's work, even Graham Hancock. When you start to see the vortex mathematics take place, and how there seems to be like this Pandora's box, or um, like scientists narrowing this down to a doomsday clock. There are definite implications that we are reaching the end of this 20, just to round it off, 23 to 27,000 year, but 26,000 year cycle, and that half cycle, 12, 11,000 to 16,000 year half cycle, that's seen in the passing of the North Star, right? Where we have a new North Star, and there's postulations with a polarity flip, whether or not an electromagnetic polarity flip would even have to take place, whether or not we would even know it, because if it's a universal event and not a localized event, that is, it's not localized to the Earth, it's not localized to our solar system, it might not even be localized to the Milky Way, and or it's it may be working in such a way where the entire universe is flipped, right? And that other bodies, other universes, not necessarily stretching toward a multiverse, but using that as a general construct, right? A constructor theory of sorts is to say that we may not even feel it, we may not even be aware of it, right? But we may be aware of it on a certain scale or a certain level, where whatever you were and whatever you did in the past cycle, right? Um, it's not going to be evident until you back up in a macro view and see these. You see these eras, like you see the uh, Devonian, the Carboniferous, right? That leads toward that Carboniferous era, when you get to looking at things from a macro structural view of postulation, and how scientists sort of piece this together in a haphazard way, but there's no real conclusive proof. Like stellium 7, you can come out with fossilized remains, you can create postulations of how, carbon dating, and how long it takes for petrification to occur, and then you can create these sort of classifications, and you can even box yourself in with these Darwinian sort of theories. But that when you come down to it, the scientists that purported and reported these as fact were very aware of the fact that they were there was a huge chunk missing, and that they were misreporting in a grand sort of way, as to block something out that they weren't even 100% privy to the information in the first place, that it led back to a very confusing and confounding principle of the occult, that you couldn't refute grimoire, that the Bible itself is probably a grimoire, that Jesus is probably the story, uh, just that tip of the iceberg of a much grander story, Krishna, that these names are used to even further box and manipulate. Again, it's like Hellraiser in the box, right? It's like, do you really want to open the box up? Because what will invariably happen is your physical self, your temporal self, will be torn up to bits. And do you really think that there's anything more left of you? Like if you're talking about the Coptic Gnostic concepts of a universal soul, of a unified soul, it's like, is that what you're getting at? Is that the truth that you want? That you're willing to give up, and to break past and break through what is a lie, and that you are a lie. But now that you've come to this, you no longer exist, and nothing around you did either. Therefore, you are the villain. And then you get into what is a villain, and it's like, comes from the feudalistic aspects, that you're working someone else's land, right? That you are the slave, and that you, by rising up, are the villain. And more so, you are the profane from the Masonic perspective. You are the terrorist from the elitist, globalist, um, oligarch perspective. You're the terrorist. I'm the terrorist. By trying to break free and not understanding the implications of, well, we all have to be sellouts. We're sellouts by nature, and we all sort of live in this paramnesia, this toxified elixir that this unseen force that could only be described in a physical sense is some spider that probably lives in another dimension that it, that controls everything, and it's the controlling factor. It's like you end up looking completely insane. Like, what is witchcraft? Why does witchcraft have anything to say for it? How is it that these strange rituals that could only be from our perspective taken back to this pagan yore, right? And the earthen altar, these earthly altars to leave blank the expression of ego at the crest of what is being sacrificed, and that we live in the cult, in the religion, where we are not only sacrificing the animals, but we are sacrificing the pure sun. We are sacrificing everything that's pure around us, so that you can be the hero and keep the falsity alive for another day and go on with your false persona of individuality, and that you are this flawed, I'm not going to say individual, but yeah, you are an individual that doesn't exist anywhere at any time but right now, right here. And even in your communications, you're only using those attributes in your human genome that are able to fire off in enough semblance of order to express themselves, but that you're working against yourself because all those other attributes, you could call them, or errors in your human genome, the ninth chromosome, the 11th chromosome, the repeating information of error codes, that's what makes you look like a unique individual. That now that you're done talking about a very serious subject, you can go back to whatever it is, eating your candy, self pleasuring yourself, right? Masturbating, being gluttonous and overeating, go back into your own narcissistic confinement where you're doing your artwork, where you're working on what will give you a sort of a political prowess, from working on your next degree to trying to get more people on in a social networking system. Like, you can talk about very serious subjects, but at the end of the day, you are just an animal that foreseeably will go back to the same behavior. It wouldn't matter if suddenly these so-called aliens through disclosure came out. All you're looking for is a level of comfort, right? All you're looking for, just like Mother Circe turning those unsuspecting victims that could be love bombed into pigs and then slaughtering them and eating them. And they say that this is what the modern day church is all about. That's what it was. That Jordan Maxwell was equating church to the word Kirk, and the word Kirk back to Circe, and that it's like that's the religion that you follow. You follow the witch. You follow the witchcraft. All the men who follow this form of feminism are warlocks, and those that work part and parcel to this are druids. They talk about craft, fellow craft, witchcraft out in the open. It's being taught everywhere that you can see it. If you just get into Black's Law Dictionary, if you look at wokeism, the things that are being taught to children in public libraries and schools, if you look at John Dee's work in the hieroglyphic monad, you will see how he was coming out with a certain construct that was of a constructor theory. It was like this. He was able to at least articulate this into a symbol. Like, um, that's why Stephen Hawking and other physicists were celebrated, because they came at least, or Einstein, they came at least much closer to giving you a symbol and saying, I'm standing by this. I'm not just talking about this whole idea of parallel timelines or a duality, you know, or a tertiary measure of a third existent point that comes from like a Zoroastrianism, you know, fourth proposed law, that from these these areas of chaos or disorder or entropy, you now have this production. Like, we need to keep churning out the deaths for everybody to be able to live and survive. And if you're alive and you can articulate and you can use your intellect, well, then maybe you were chosen, and maybe you're just going to have to suck it up and eat that chicken and enjoy that chicken, and know that thousands upon thousands of people, if not millions of people, have been sacrificed so you can sit on your ass and live in this capitalistic system and just go along with the feudalism that's taking place now, very alive and well here today, right? And that certain people live under direct feudalism, they live under neo feudalism, they live under corporate neo feudalism. It all depends on which flavor you want to choose, all the way down to your quarks and which quarks you choose, but on a quantum scale, right? And to me, this gets it just like, this may seem way off topic, but this gets into dual systems and quantum gravity. It goes all the way down into the very physics of what we choose and what chooses us, down to the muses that propel and run us, the energies that we, and that ties into certain planetary systems where it gets confusing and abstract. But the way that you have to look at it is, you understand that on Saturn and on Jupiter, like I said, hydrogen behaves completely different. It is a solid. Therefore, it's sending out a cymatic frequency or a tone. It doesn't miss us. In fact, it's so powerful. If you were to look at Jupiter at its core and you remove all the gas, right, you're looking at like something like 13 to 18 times Earth's mass or size, right? So that's why they have a hard time calling Jupiter a gas planet. But you're missing the whole point. It's a gas planet because it is 100% dictated, and like the black sun, right? The black sun. The fact that you don't have these plasma interactions occurring that give off life, and we're going to be, even the ideas of the Zoroastrianism is is very misinterpreted. It is not this peaceful dancing around the maypole type of paganistic bullshit where you're worshiping the sun, and the sun is giving forth life, and Hava Nagila Hava, and you're just, that's not what's happening. When you go into this processional process of worshiping the sun and seeing that the corporeal, the temporal aspects of life and death, the samsara that's taking place, has to have a dark side, right? And you start to look at John Dee's uh, hieroglyphic monad, you realize that there has to be, like, what he was doing is he was showing the chiral positioning of the two hemispheres, right? Where they look identical and they have to be made identical as a mechanical construct, but that there has to be a dark side and there has to be a light side, so to speak. There has to be good and evil. At the end of the day, one is good and one is evil. You can think short-sightedly and say, I get to eat this burrito with this delicious carne asada, and even more so, I'm sipping on my coffee and I have my salsa and I have all the things that I love. And it's like, well, you don't even know yourself. You don't even know what you love. Like, if you were to live at a higher area of intellect, you would taste the death. You would taste the carnage. You would taste the fat. You would know the spoil, right? And the item in front of you would taste like shit, right? So how much are you compromising just to keep the flesh alive? And then when you start to look at the layers of this, right? And this gets into spinner energies, and you could even almost look at it as spin energy, and you could almost look at it as swirl on energies in different jurisdictional quadrants or zones, and how the spinning of energies in the sphere, what's talked about in the emerald tablets, right? What Robert Bigelow talks about in reference to Skinwalker Ranch. Like, I actually put side by side of Brian Fugel, the current owner of Skinwalker Ranch, right? who's completely capitalized on it. He's selling sick tickets to the sideshow, but he's doing it in a way of it's very planned. And by the way, he's Mormon. Mormons are tied right back into the Masonic Church. Just look up Joseph Smith. You'll see all the connections there. Look up Hiram Abiff. You'll see, you'll see the connections there. You'll see the names of the dead being called out over and over again. You'll see that you have everlasting life under a God, under the jurisdictional powers of a Lord that has been chosen. And you'll see the people that believe in the carnal and the corporeal aspects that tie into modern day Christianity, but it's not. It's not. It gets back into Tertullian um, exactitude of your soul is Christian by nature. My soul is Christian by nature. But that's not Jesus. And yeah, you sound heretical. In fact, you are in all aspects heretical. Even though you have become more Christian, even though you have said that Christ lives within you, right? Even though it goes in line with the true Christian ethics, where you're saying Krishna, you're saying this goes back into the Vedas, this goes back into the Hindu philosophies and religion, and this goes way back before that, right? Way back before these Star Wars and all this, these areas of moral conjecture can better be looked at by people that are looking at the sciences and the philosophy much closer than I am right now, right? But it does. You have your practical magic, you have your practical solutions, you have those who practice things under a practical measure where they can be seen as the physical displays. And I believe that's what John Dee was making effort to do, is that he was showing the symbol, he was showing the distance, he was showing the energetics of the monad, and he was saying, look, if you want to argue with this or you want to come up with other mathematics, fine, but I'm taking in the geometrical constants and the constructs that I see around me as the only thing that we could call laws or principles of the fundamental truth. But I think that if there was anything missing, was his understanding of movement, rotation, multidimensional processionary influence, and even more so, a more sophisticated view at physics, right? That we're breaking past what would become the standard model from what he was looking at, right? Long ago, really. And the fact that they have already known this and built this into the English alphabet that's influencing the entire world abroad. That everybody's speaking English, they're writing in English, they're using those 26 letters of the alphabet. That those 26 letters, and I've identified a very critical point where you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and then it gets to J, right? K, L, M, N, O, and then P. There's 5 letters there, right? There's 5 letters there that are 100% pointing toward the charting system in the financial markets, pointing toward monad in the O, pointing toward perpendicular lines with the L, right? Pointing toward a resetting process with the N, right? With the K, you have the Essenian or the diagonal influence that could be seen as K for Cain, right? But you see the J, which was the signification of Jesus, the advent of the J being a newer item, right, on the plate, it's the past few hundred years. And then you have the P, Peter, Paul, right? You have that entire inference of the Catholic Church and Rome and the reduction of Rome. But you have the energetics, and in that, you have a left and right paradigm to a mathematical property, right? That you could look at it again through numerological standards. Like you could convert this back into a number system, and people do it all the time. That's what numerology is. and you see a left and right hand path mathematics. Some people live on the right hand side and some people live on the left hand side. And the confusion comes when you were looking at that little image that John D came up with, where you look at the hieroglyphic monad, and to you, if I were to say what is the right hand side, and you see that little creature, right? You see that depiction that he gives you, and you point to the right, and it's like, well, what if that little creature is facing you? So some people literally put themselves in it and they imagine themselves in it. And other people are always looking at things in the existential where they're looking at it on the without. And so you have to get into antithetical and juxtaposed positions. You have to get into the gas solution that surrounds us. You have to get into what is concurrent standard of that particular place on any particular day. That is the gas solution, the temperature, the rotational spin cycle, and the life that comes forth from that in a conscious mechanism that we are, and that itself is being controlled through a system that is being manipulated, and that consciousness itself is something that this I wouldn't even know what to call it. Like, is it a demonic realm? Is it hell? Is it aliens? Right? Is this a holographic universe? Like, you can just keep going on and on. But what physicists do is they're looking at the constants. They're looking at the construct of it. And even more, I think that Levin's research on the behavior of singular human cells, anthrobots, xenobots, and on, I think that is going to reveal something that is going to make scientists back up from their microscopes and start to check whether or not these things are attacking their eyeballs themselves. Because I think what we're going to find is that those things that we're looking at, those anthrobots, those xenobots, right? That they have not only a consciousness and a will, but that they are quite aware of us. And that's where I'm going to leave off. It's like, what are we comprised of? What do we live within? What are we made up of? Who really are we, right? And maybe again, what's being postulated on a larger scale every single day, and it's starting to gain a little too much momentum, is, are we the aliens? Are we?